The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
We are going to spend plenty of time on the life and times of Frank Howard, the greatest player ever for the expansion Washington Senators, and one of the most beloved athletes in this area. It's a long time since he played here. His last game, 1971, 52 years ago. But for those of us who grew up here in the 60s and the 70s, he was right there with Sonny Jurgensen, I don't know, Charlie Taylor, Bobby Mitchell. There are only a handful of guys who were that beloved here. And Frank Howard was the most beloved baseball player and the most amazing baseball player we've ever had here. We've had Hall of Famers, and Walter Johnson may be the best ever. Of course, I never saw him pitch. He retired in 1927. Max Scherzer is going to the Hall of Fame, and Ryan Zimmerman was Mr. National. He had the career that anybody would like to have with one franchise. Won't make the Hall of Fame, but it was a tremendous career topped off by a World Series championship. But Frank Howard was just, you had to see it to believe it. 6'7", close to 300 pounds, and if you're ever out at RFK Stadium, even after all those years of no baseball, 33 years, and you saw it when it returned in 2005, and you looked at those upper deck seats that were painted white, those were where some of his home runs landed. They were shots. Yeah, he had a 38-ounce bat, and he would swing it like a toothpick, and boom, kaboom, led the American League in home runs twice, and again, just a beloved figure on and off the field, and we will spend plenty of time on that. Steve Buckhantz is going to join me at 11:20. He's about my age. He saw Hondo play at RFK Stadium, and before that, DC Stadium before that. And in fact, I knew him pretty well because Buck does a golf tournament every year, and Frank would show up. Didn't play, but hung out, and just a real great guy to hang around with, and just so sad he passed away yesterday at the age of 87. Ron Rivera with some comments yesterday heading into the trade deadline at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He knows nothing, not saying anything, but maybe we can read between the lines and see what they might do. Montez Sweat may be on the block. There was a report yesterday from The Athletic that there's interest in Atlanta, and that there's a possibility, according to Ben Standing, that they might trade him there as a conditional trade. In other words, if the Falcons don't sign him to a long-term deal, they get a third-rounder. If they do, Washington will get a second-rounder. So we'll get to all of that coming up. And Lauren Druhan will join me at 10 o'clock, talk some college football. I found a list of the top 10 Auburn moments from the last decade. That would be the decade of Lauren. So we'll have some fun kicking those things around. And other stories in college football, including Maryland, big disappointing month, and looking to get right, not at the right time, with Penn State coming to town on Saturday. All right, there is breaking news from overnight, and you're probably aware of it by now. I just want to throw in my 2 cents on this. This is the NBA. This is how it works. You not only decide you don't want to be someplace, you decide where you want to go, and they give it to you. Now, you have to be a star of a certain level to do that, understand. But James Harden has a history of just being a complete pain in the butt wherever he goes, and he makes himself enough of a pain in the butt that he gets traded to wherever he wants to go, and he's done it again. Remember, he called Daryl Morey a liar, and then the Sixers open up training camp. He shows up for like one day, disappears for 10 days. They're getting ready to hop on the plane to play their opener at Milwaukee, and he shows up on the plane, and they say, no, it's not going to work that way. You're not getting on here, so they didn't get him on the plane. Then they go play the game at Milwaukee, and now the NBA, and I think they're probably going to drop this, but the NBA is now investigating whether they broke some rules in not playing Harden in the opening game. You know, they've tightened things up for national television now, and it's just a complete circus the way things are operating, and Adam Silver is at fault. He has let the players totally run the league. So Harden goes from Philadelphia with P.J. Tucker and Philip Petrusev for Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Nick Batum, K.J. Martin, a 2028 unprotected first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, a 2029 pick swap, and an additional first-round pick that will be routed from a third team, which we don't know what the third team is. Clippers are looking to add that third team, and the 76ers have waived Danny Green to create the roster spot to make this all happen. Now, he gets to reunite with Russell Westbrook, who ain't Russell Westbrook no more, and he gets to play with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, who sort of play when they want to. This from the story that was reported on ESPN by Adrian Wojnarowski. Harden is ecstatic to be going to the Clippers. Was hoping to fly to Los Angeles as soon as possible, sources said, so he can attend tonight's game against the Orlando Magic. He's expected to play, later this week when they are in New York against the Knicks. And on that road trip, Harden would play against his former team. Well, he's got a lot of former teams now. Former team in Brooklyn on Wednesday before they finish the swing in Dallas next Friday. It's the league. And you know, if you could put a bet on this, and I bet you can, there will be problems between James Harden and the Clippers by the end of the year. That's just the way it works. Now, I imagine the deal is contingent on him agreeing to a contract extension. He's not happy that he opted in for what the player option was this year, like $35 million. And at 34, you know, how much does he have left? How much are they going to give him? Tired of that. All right, Frank Howard. Let's start with this. He came here in 1964, at the end of 1964, so after the 64 season. And this was really a pivotal time in Washington history because at that time we had only 2 professional teams. The Bullets, who became the Wizards, they were still in Baltimore. The Capitals weren't formed until 1974. So we had 2 professional teams, both of them playing at then D.C. Stadium, later renamed RFK Stadium after the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. And the teams weren't good. The Redskins were not a good team because they had been all white until 1962 when Bobby Mitchell broke the color line, and it took a while to rebuild. But they had made a deal before the 64 season to get Sonny Jurgensen. And Sonny Jurgensen did something as well as anyone has ever done it, throw a beautiful spiral. And it was exciting to go out and watch him throw to Hall of Fame receivers like Bobby Mitchell and Charlie Taylor. And the Senators, they were, and we got, screwed on this, but the Senators had been a bad team for a long time. And after the 1960 season, they moved to Minnesota to become the Twins. Well, baseball immediately expanded, so they put a team in Los Angeles, the Angels, and they put a team back in Washington and gave them the same name, the Senators. But they weren't the same Senators. The Senators who went to Minnesota went to the World Series in 1965. We were left here with an expansion team that wasn't good at all. And Frank Howard came in, and the team wasn't that much better, but they were exciting. And to see Howard hit these moonshots was just an unbelievable thrill. The sound of the ball coming off the bat was unbelievable. He was just a big, big man. He had been an All-American basketball player at Ohio State, and in fact was named to the 1957 All-American team with 2 of the greatest players who ever played the game, Elgin Baylor and Wilt Chamberlain, plus a guard from Columbia by the name of Chet Forte, who became a legendary television director and directed Monday Night Football for a long time. But Frank Howard was a part of that. He averaged, as a junior at Ohio State, 20 points and 15 rebounds a game and could have played in the NBA, was drafted by the Philadelphia Warriors, but chose to sign with the Dodgers. They at that time had become the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he was Rookie of the Year in 1960, helped them win the World Series in 1963, but was kind of a platoon player for them, wasn't playing every day, wanted to play every day, and came here in a 7-player trade for Claude Osteen. So by 1965, you had these 2 spectacular athletes in town playing for teams that just weren't very good. So you were more interested in the athlete than the team. Sonny and Frank Howard. And 6 years ago, I was doing a podcast series, and I was fortunate enough to get Frank Howard for this. And one of the big moments in his career, I mean, he had an unbelievable year in 1968 when he went on a week-long tear, like somebody would go on a bender. He went on a homer bender where he hit 10 home runs over a 6-day period. That's how incredible he was that week. But in 1969, Ted Williams came to town as the manager of the team. And what Ted Williams did for Frank Howard was pretty remarkable. He made him a much better hitter. Now, Howard hit 48 home runs that year, lost the home run title by 1 to Harmon Killebrew, but raised his batting average, cut down on his strikeouts, and he and the team had their best year as the expansion Senators. They finished 10 games over 500, which in comparison to what they did the other 10 years they were here was remarkable. And then 2 years later, of course, they left for Texas. But this was part of the conversation where talked about Ted Williams coming in. He had worn 9 throughout his Hall of Fame career with the Red Sox, was going to wear 9 as the manager of the Senators. Howard had worn 9, changed his number to 33, and I asked him why he chose 33.
Because it's the number I always wore in the minor leagues.
Okay, all right. And he says to you, how can a guy who hit 44 home runs walk only 48 times?
I told him, I said, well, I try to be aggressive. He's the most electric, charismatic individual I've ever met in my life. And I said, well, I try to be aggressive. Yeah. I've seen you hit. You like that first little Swifty you see, that number 1, the fastball. I said, Skip, I better like that number 1 because that 2, 3, and 4 curveball, slider, change, to me, they're UFO. He almost jumped out of his seat. He said, whoa, what do you mean UFO? To me, they're unidentifiable flying objects. He started laughing. He said, well, let me ask you this. Call everybody Bush Ligger. He said, let me ask you this, Bush. He said, do you ever take 2 strikes, get a good pitch to really move on? I said, Skipper, if I took 2 strikes to get a good pitch to move on, I'd be walking back to that bench 250 times a year instead of 125. He started laughing. And he said, well, can you take a strike?
Yeah.
Now, in baseball, you've got a 2-strike approach to hitting. We all must have one. But in 145 years of Major League Baseball, you can count the great 2-strike hitters probably on 6 hands, the great ones.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody can hit with a strike. He said, I'm talking about if it's a tough located fastball or something other than what you're looking for. He said, certainly, anybody can hit with a strike. He said, well, try it for me. I said, all right. Well, he took a guy, an undisciplined hitter, with a strike zone from the bill of his cap to his shoelaces.
Yeah.
Probably 2 or 3 inches off the plate, in off the plate, or way off the plate. And I'm not going to have a strike zone like a Killebrew, a Mays, a Aaron. They're smaller men. A Yastrzemski, a Kaline, they're smaller men. But he did tighten it up to the point where I started laying off of some bad breaking balls in the dirt, some borderline high fastballs that you pop up or swing through. And he tightened it up, and believe it or not, I had more 2 balls, no strikes, 3 balls, 1 strike counts than I ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And as a result, I had probably the best year I had in the big leagues that year.
Yeah, you did double your walk total, plus you hit 48 home runs, lost the title to Harmon Killebrew by 1. And a team that was the best of the expansion Senators. You guys were 10 games over 500.
Now, to show you how close you are and how far away you are.
Okay.
To show you how we had a pitching staff that led the league in ERA. We had a career years out of our entire ball club. It was an expansion year. We had career years out of our entire ball club. Now, this is going to show you how far away you are and how close you are. But our pitching staff, our starters were very young. Had we had a Sanford Koufax, a Bob Gibson, a Juan Morichel, a Tommy Seaver, a Steve Carlton, if we'd had an established number 1 starter, who's to say you might have gone to World Series play that year?
Wow.
Because they're going to give you another 8 games over 500.
Well, the Orioles that year, Frank, won 110 games and pretty much ran away with the division.
Then we probably wouldn't have gone.
Yeah.
But what did we win, 90?
86, I think.
We won. But, I mean, you're that close, and yet you're that far away.
Yeah.
Sometimes 1 or 2 players can really make a difference in where you, or at least give you a shot,
Well, the pitchers that he mentioned were all Hall of Fame pitchers, and aside from Walter Johnson and later Max Scherzer, those were the Hall of Fame pitchers from Washington. None of them pitched for the expansion Senators. But as I mentioned, Howard was a feared hitter. He put fear in the hearts of pitchers when he came to the plate, swinging that big bat with the 6'7" frame and the big arms, and just a massive man. And Sam McDowell, who was one of the great fastball pitchers of his era, was afraid to face Howard to this extent. Here's another story that Howard told me on the podcast.
He was so afraid to face you that Alvin Dark, his manager, would move him to an outfield spot for your at-bat, bring in a relief pitcher for just you, and then bring him back after that. True or not true?
No, I moved him to second base and then brought him back.
Why was he so afraid of you?
You look down through history, and I didn't see Feller, but besides that blazing fastball, had a great curveball just a great curveball.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't see him, but the two guys that come to my mind that combine sheer velocity with a great breaking ball, curveball, would either be Nolie Ryan and Sanford Koufax or Sandy Koufax. Well, you put them in any order you want to put them in. Mm-hmm. Now, let's take four guys that had well above average 4 pitches: fastball, slider, curveball, changeup. Sam McDowell's one of them. Stevie Carlton's another one. And Frank Tanana as a young pitcher before he hurt his arm. He later became a professional quality pitcher, but as a youngster, his 4 pitches would rate with anybody's. And the other one would be my old teammate, the Dominican Juan Moricharo.
Wow.
Power pitcher is a young guy. Power pitcher.
That was Howard on Sam McDowell. One other story, and this is, he did hit a home run in the 1969 All-Star Game. His last All-Star Game, by the way, played in the day. It was rained out Tuesday night. They played it on a Wednesday afternoon, and the American League got crushed. Willie McCovey hit 2 home runs. He was the MVP of the game. But Howard hit a home run off Steve Carlton of the St. Louis Cardinals at the time, and being in the ballpark that day, it was incredible. The noise that was made when Howard hit that home run was unbelievable, and we just didn't have moments like that in those days. An all-star game playing against the best of the best, and Howard hits a home run in his own ballpark. And as a finale, the last game ever played by the Washington Senators facing the New York Yankees in position to win it, but the game goes down as a forfeit because the fans stormed the field before the last out and tore things up, and they just called it a forfeit in favor of the Yankees. But Howard did hit a home run in that game, which put the Senators ahead. Ron Rivera with the call.
There's a line drive to left field. This one is going. It is gone. Frank Howard has just hit home run number 26, and again he gets a standing ovation. And the cheers for Hondo, who waved his batting helmet to the fans. I just wish the owners of the American League could see this. The ones who voted 10-2 to move this club out of Washington.
That was the late, great Ron Rivera with the call. Frank, when you hit the home run and waved to the fans, what was that feeling like?
Oh, there again, it's one of the thrills we get out of playing that game in front of your hometown fans. It was a thrill for me. Sorry to see it happen. The club go there. Like I said, I didn't make the adjustment to Texas like I should have. Mm-hmm. But hell, I had my best years here. I enjoyed it. I loved the city, and it's kind of a disappointment. Very, very disappointing.
Well, that was a heck of a night. As you remember, they tore up the field, and the game was never completed. Did you get off the field safely that night, or did somebody?
Yeah, what Ted told me is, I'm going to take you out of here. You get showered and get out of the ballpark.
Yeah,
because he thought something like that would happen.
Well, that was a sad ending, but one last thrill from Hondo. He did hit the first home run Texas at Arlington Stadium, but he was traded that year for the Tigers and then finished up his career in Japan and had to retire because of a back issue. But just an unbelievable person, unbelievable thrills here, and people my age look back fondly on the great Frank Howard, who passed away at the age of 87. I tell you all the time that the most interesting reading is found in the obituaries. Matt Schudel wrote one. It was a front page obit today in the Post, and just one little tidbit here. Howard was married to Carol Johansky. They had 6 kids together. They divorced. He married Donna Scott. She died in 2016 after 25 years of marriage. He subsequently remarried Johansky. In addition to his wife, survivors include 6 children from their marriage, a sister, 10 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. Rest in peace, Frank Howard. We'll have more thoughts on him coming up in the 11 o'clock hour. Steve Buckhantz will join me, but we'll get to what Ron Rivera said yesterday about the trade deadline coming up at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and also the challenge that he didn't make that may have cost him big against Philadelphia on Sunday. We'll get to that more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Much more on the passing of Frank Howard as we roll through the morning. Steve Buckhantz, who, like me, grew up watching Howard play for the Washington Senators, will join me at 11:20. And if you missed the parts of the podcast that I did with Howard that I just played, I'll get back to those at 11 o'clock. Also, Lauren Druhan will join me at 10 o'clock. We'll talk college football. And Rick Neuheisel on yesterday with Dan Patrick had a story about field storming, which happens when there are big upsets. They had one at Kansas over the weekend with Kansas knocking off Oklahoma, and Neuheisel's got a funny story about that. But yesterday was the usual Ron Rivera, I looked at the tape news conference, and not too much news to report out of this. In fact, he wouldn't say one thing about the trade deadline. They tried to ask him all kinds of ways, about who he likes best on the defensive line and things. No, he wasn't biting on any of that. And he said, you'll find out at 4 o'clock. Now, he did not say, we're not doing anything, bank on it. And he wouldn't say that anyway, because you want to leave yourself open just in case somebody wants to make a crazy deal. But in terms of his interest, there wouldn't seem to be much interest on his part in making a deal. This, if it happens, would seem to come from Josh Harrison ownership, because Ron Rivera, in order to save his job, which, the only way he does that is like they win the last 9 in 2 playoff games or something crazy like that. But, it's not in his interest to be in a rebuilding situation, because there's going to be a new coach here next year, and he knows that. So, if it's up to him, I would imagine he keeps everybody. But, if there is input from ownership, there, I guess, is a possibility that there could be several trades that are going to be made. And we'll get to that in a minute. But one of the key plays from Sunday, as you know, was the Devontae Smith 4th down catch right in front of the Commanders' bench in the third quarter. A 7-point game. Commanders up 7, trying to protect that. And they would have gotten the ball at that point if Rivera had challenged. But he stood there and did nothing. And Jalen Hurts got his team right up to the line of scrimmage, ran a play, and was too late to challenge or have a review. So that was that. And after the game, Rivera said he still didn't know what happened. And so this was a question from Ben Standing, and it's a question a lot of people want to know. Well, if you're sitting there in that situation, you got the headset on, your team is screaming that they've all seen Smith drop the ball, don't you have somebody upstairs to advise you on that? And Rivera kind of leaves that fuzzy. This was Ben Standing at yesterday's news conference.
What's the process that you guys have in place? Who's up in the booth? Who are you talking to?
Well, up in the booth, obviously what we're hoping to get is a look. Okay, we'd love to see the replay and love to see it out there quickly. What you don't want to do is get in a situation where we were in, and that is we didn't get a chance to get a look. If you throw the flag and you're wrong, you lose it. And so we're trying to decide. We know how important having the challenges are. We know how important having the timeouts are out. And when there's really nothing that's definitive, it's hard to make that decision appropriately.
And just who's in your ear in that time?
We have people upstairs that are in my ear.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's not going to tell you who it is. Bruce Allen did this for a while. He wasn't particularly good at it. And before that, and I talked about this yesterday, When Joe Gibbs came back in 2004, he came back to a challenge system that was not in place when he had coached. Now, he left after the 92 season. They didn't have any instant replay then. They did away with it. So 91 was the last time they had it, and there was no coach challenge on that. So to prepare for this, and it was a smart thing, he hired a former replay official to be an assistant coach who would sit up in the box upstairs and would advise him on what to do. And Gibbs was constantly making the wrong call. Either he didn't challenge or he challenged things that clearly should not have been challenged. And it turned out that he just wasn't listening to Larry Hill. He was doing it in his own way. And I don't know what happened over the next 3 years, but there were some issues with that. With Rivera, I guess there's somebody there, but he's not going to tell you who it is. And is it somebody on the level of Bruce Allen, just another team official that sits up there? Whatever, but it was a poor job. And given the circumstances of the game, the fact they're up 7 against a Philly team that you know can score, they'd scored 34 points against you in the last game. What do you have to lose besides a timeout? Yeah, it's important to hang on to timeouts, but he doesn't handle them well anyway. So in that situation, if he didn't know, it would have been wise just to throw the flag. And the fact that he didn't know and is waiting around for a replay, well, a veteran like Jalen Hurts, he knows what's going on. He's not going to wait around for that. He's let's go. If there's any doubt, let's run a play, because the sacrifice of an incomplete pass or a run that gets stuffed or something like that, no big deal in comparison to keeping a drive alive, which they did and scored a touchdown on, tied the game, and that was pretty much it. So whatever Rivera's doing with this challenge system, it's not working very well. If everybody sits around with their fingers in their nose and says, "Yeah, let's wait for the replay," really. More from Rivera yesterday, and the team now has lost 5 of its last 6. It's got a schedule now that doesn't look good. They're even playing a New England team that's in free fall, and they're 2-point underdogs on the road for that, not to mention 2 games against Dallas, San Francisco, Miami, etc. This question from Scott Abraham to Rivera yesterday.
What gives you optimism about this team in the coming weeks here?
Well, first of all, I think the play of the quarterback. It's something that we've talked about. And I think when you start seeing the production that he's having, it's now time for us to go out and do the things that we're capable of. And I think we're more than capable. I really do. But, again, we haven't shown it. And that's something that we as coaches have got to make sure we're giving these guys every opportunity to be successful. And then if that's the case, we got to go out and make sure we're executing properly.
Okay. So, again, a lot of it centers around the quarterback. He's riding that hard. I imagine his conversations with Josh Harris go that way. It's a lot about, they're building and look at what they're doing with the quarterback. And when he makes his case, I guess, to stay for next year and beyond, because I don't think he comes back with the same contract. He's got only 1 year left, and you don't do a lame duck. I think that's a lot of what's going to be based on. Hey, we developed you a starting quarterback. You know how hard it is to have a starting quarterback that you can rely on here in for a long time? Well, we did that. So maybe that's what he's hanging his hat on. Last question from that I pulled from the news conference yesterday. Playing Philadelphia the way they did on Sunday, the first half was very impressive with what they did. And given how they had all these dropbacks earlier in the year where they had 40 sacks for Howell coming into this game, Sunday they had only 1. And it does seem like if you're going to run the offense with Howell, this is the way to run it. And Rivera on that thought with reporters yesterday.
Do you see what you guys did Sunday as a template for how this offense can succeed moving
absolutely.
forward?
That's what I've always seen. I've always thought that's where we're headed. And a lot of it comes from just, like I told you guys when I was trying to decide where we wanted to go with a coordinator, looking at things that they were doing in Kansas City during their playoff run. And that is what really kind of led me in that direction. And yesterday was a good example of it. We saw it the first time we played Philadelphia. We saw it in moments of other games. But we've got to get consistent there. And again, you've got to play complementary football. And you've got to play complementary offense, defense, and special teams in terms of each one of those groups. Defensively, it's got to be complementary in terms of stopping the run and the pass. And the pass rush has to complement each other with the coverage and stuff like that, and so on for offense, defense, and special teams as well. So that's what we're working towards is being consistent and complementary.
And he did say about his defensive line that they are inconsistent. That was supposed to be the strength of the team. They're not. And their third down percentage has not been good. I mean, they were really doing a good job for a while there, but most teams are right around 50% or more every week, as the Eagles were yesterday. He's blaming it on the fact that they're putting him in third and short all the time. I doesn't seem to me that's been the case. It's been a lot of third and longs that they're converting. That is not what you want to do when you're on defense. You want to put a team in third and long and force them into a limited number of plays that they can run to get that, and they're getting it time after time after time. All right, we're watching what's happening with the trade deadline. So what are we? We're at 5.5 hours away at this point, and so far nothing to report other than speculation. The most prominent name mentioned is Montez Sweat. The report yesterday from Ben Standing in The Athletic is that they would trade Sweat to the Falcons, and if Atlanta is able to sign him to a long-term deal, then the Commanders would get a second-round pick in return. If not, they get a third-round pick. I think it makes sense all around. I think that would be the move to make to get rid of him. You also have heard the Chase Young's name being thrown around. I think somebody would be interested in picking him up. And to me, just me personally, you could look at Sweat and say, well, he's 27 and Young is 24. Okay, so age makes a difference. You could say that maybe the upside for Chase Young is higher because he was Defensive Rookie of the Year. Coming out of Ohio State, he was considered to be one of the most imposing college defensive players coming out. But, is he a game wrecker? No, I don't think he is. Was he worthy of the second pick? No. And then he's got injuries. And, okay, he's been healthy this year. He missed the first game because of a stinger suffered in the first exhibition game. So they played 8 games, and he's played in 7 of them, or 7 games, and he's played in 6 of them. Yeah, 6 of them. But I don't see anything where they should break the bank for him. In fact, I would not be shocked, even if they trade Sweat, that they don't re-sign Chase Young. That he goes someplace else and you get a compensatory pick, though that's not a guaranteed thing. Everybody thinks, big free agent leaves, you get a compensatory pick. It depends on how you spend in free agency, and it's a complicated formula. But they have cap room, too. They will have cap room next year, but these defensive players like this, they don't grow on trees. So that's going to be a tough one to call. The other name that's two other names that are being thrown around. One is Jacoby Brissett. I would certainly think about dealing him, and I would think that there would be demand for him given the quarterback situation that is going on right now in the NFL. This guy DeVito, who played for the Giants on Sunday, he can't even pass. He stinks. There's teams run through quarterbacks. I said this yesterday. We're going to have a Super Bowl where there's going to be like 2 undrafted free agent rookie quarterbacks playing, because of the attrition rate of quarterbacks. We've had, backup quarterbacks win in the past. We saw it with the Philadelphia Eagles with Nick Foles. We saw it with Jeff Hostetler years before that with the Giants. So it's happened before, but it seems like quarterbacks are going down even faster than they used to. Phil Simms, who had been mostly healthy through the middle part of his career, had a calf injury, and that's what brought Hostetler in. But Hostetler had been with the team for a long time. He'd been a very good college quarterback at West Virginia. He knew the system, and he was able to step in. Now you got these guys, because of salary cap restrictions, that haven't played and can't play. They're just guys. So Jacoby Brissett, who's won in the league, somebody might be wise to bring him in. Look at what happened last year with San Francisco. And Josh Johnson, who's played for everybody like 3 or 4 times, goes down with a concussion. You don't have any quarterbacks left. They have the new rule now where you can have a third quarterback and he plays only if the first 2 get hurt. But I don't think Washington's done that this year, and Howell hasn't missed a snap, so that's made that easier to deal with. But I would certainly think about dealing Jacoby Brissett. And the other name that's been thrown around is Antonio Gibson, who doesn't seem to be used as much in the offense. It would seem with the offense that came here with Eric Bieniemy from Kansas City, he'd be key for that. He did have a fumble, which scared a lot of people off, I guess. But if there's interest in him and they're not going to use him, might as well, because this is a game where you've got to load up when you can, and in a year that you're probably not going to be in the playoffs, take a miracle to get there, you might as well load up on some picks and do some rebuilding. All right, every week now, Chick Hernandez does a sit-down with Ron Rivera. They air this on Mondays on Channel 9. He used to do this with Channel 4. Now he's got to deal with Channel 9, and Chick Hernandez sits with him at the Bubble, in Ashburn, and they go over a bunch of things. Chick has been around here a long time, does a very good job with this. And this is Rivera with, and I just have to think about the Herman Edwards, you play to win the game. This is Ron Rivera saying, yeah, we did everything right, but win the game.
There were so many good things, in my opinion, outweighed the negative, with the exception of losing that game. I thought we played well enough at moments. I thought offensively we did what we needed to do. Defensively, we gave ourselves opportunities. And then at the end of it, we just didn't capitalize when we had to. And that's a tough pill to swallow, just because it's a talented team. I really believe we've got good talent. We now have to put it together. We now have to play consistent football more so than anything else.
I did a lot of interviews with Norv Turner when he was here from 94, got fired in 99. Listened to a lot of his news conferences. It's the same thing. It's a play here, it's a play there. That's the NFL, Ron. You got to find a way to win these games. And yeah, if you do everything right and you lose, you still lose. So there's no, and he said it after they lost to Philadelphia in that game, although they were kind of doing everything they could to convince you it was a moral victory. There are no moral victories. And in the league, the great coaches, the great teams, they make the play to win the game. Vince Lombardi used to say, there are 3 or 4 plays in every game that decide it. Since we don't know what those 3 or 4 plays are, we're going to play as hard as we can on every one of them. And I'm not saying they're not playing hard, but they're not doing what it takes to win. And you can't get away with saying, yeah, everything was good except we didn't win the game. Well, that's the thing. It's better to stink and find a way to win the game than to be great and lose and find a way to lose, which is what his teams have seemingly found a way to do over the course of time that he's been here in the 3 years plus, 3.5 years. This is on, and Rivera was asked about this a bunch of times at his news conference yesterday about, what they might do at the trade deadline. And he said, I'll let you know as soon as, the deadline passes, blah, 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 blah. This was, I thought, a good question from Chick, and this is part of the problem with the dual role where you're essentially the general manager. He doesn't have that title, but the coach-centric operation where you're picking the players and coaching the players. This was, again, Chick with Rivera yesterday.
I know you don't talk personnel, but you oversee this team. How do you go about coach personnel? How do you do that?
Well, what it is more than anything else, Chick, it's about information gathering by the people that you have that are here. I mean, it's a huge collaboration between us and the personnel department. Marty Herney, Martin Mayhew, and those guys that work they're getting as much information and everything they can right now. And as all this stuff's being put together, we'll disseminate it, we'll talk about it, and we'll go from there. That's how we make the decision. It's a collaboration. It's not necessarily just one person saying, this is it and this is how it's going to be. Right. You try to get as much information as you can, everything from the analytics to the scouting reports on whatever needs to be done. You want to have as much information as you can so you can make the right decision.
And Logan Thomas told me yesterday, I would hate to see, the whole talk's about Sweat and Chase. Could be somebody else. But he's like, I really would not like to see those guys leave the program. As a guy who gets close with his players, do you become a counselor after this all takes place? Whatever does take place, do you then have to talk to some guys?
Oh, yeah. You always have to talk to guys about things as they happen. When you switch players out, you put a guy on the bench, you've got to talk to them. You've got to make sure they're okay. I mean, because you may need them again, and they're good players. They just may need a little opportunity. Well, same thing when guys move on. Yeah. Guys are going to wonder why, or what does it mean to me, or how's it going to impact me. And so you want to be there to be able to talk with them about those things.
Okay. Well, it's a problem because The player you keep may be one of those who wanted to go, and now you're still his coach. You may have traded a player that pisses off the rest of the locker room. Now that's his job as the coach to do that. But when you put it in his hands, this is always the problem. I've heard this many times from former players. For example, you have a tackle and a guard, and they both think they're as good as one another or better. And one of them gets a contract extension and the other one doesn't. And the one who doesn't is looking at the coach like, hey, you screwed me. If there's a general manager, there's another level there. It's somebody else who makes the decision. And I was covering the Giants when George Young was the general manager. George Young was basically pushed into the job by Pete Rozelle because the Giants were a dysfunctional mess. You had Wellington Mara, who was the owner, and Tim Mara, who was his nephew, and they were co-owners of the team, and they didn't get along. They had separate boxes, and they had window shades installed, so they couldn't even look at each other during the game, and the team was terrible, and it climaxed with this Herman Edwards, miracle at the Meadowlands. And finally, Pete Rozelle said, you guys need somebody to run your organization, and I suggest George Young. Young comes in. He hires Bill Parcells, but he's Parcells' boss. And they butted heads over things. It's just the way that happened. Well, guess what? While they were butting heads, they won 2 Super Bowls. And after the second one, Parcells had enough, and he quit. But that worked well, and it's just not going to work. I'm 100% sure that next year, when they have a new regime, a new setup, there's going to be a general manager and there's going to be a coach, and the coach reports to the general manager. The general manager drafts the players, brings them in free agency, and the coach decides which ones to keep. That system worked very well with Bobby Beathard and Joe Gibbs. Eventually, you get to a point, especially if there's success, that one has to go, and that's what happened with Beathard. He left because he wasn't getting enough, he felt, say, and when he had disagreements with Joe Gibbs. But this system now just doesn't work. And this collaborative crap where everybody sits around and they all have their input, it still is Rivera's final decision. So that's just not working. One last thing from the conversation, why he is not saying anything to anybody about trade speculation.
We just want to make sure that whatever happens between now and Tuesday at 4 o'clock, we've done all of our work, and that's what we're doing right now. We've got people working these things. We're looking, like I said, at everything from the analytics to the reports that have been written up about these guys, about what their impacts are, what their potential impact is with them and what it is without them. Everything's out there. Do I know exactly what we're going to do? No, other than what we're going to talk about, discuss, and prepare for. That we have to make the best decision that impacts and helps us.
Okay, so there's a lot of double talk there. The analytics guy, who, by the way, was not hired by Rivera. He's not supposed to report for work for another week, so he's not. This new guy who's come in, I forget his name, but the new guy is coming in. He's not here to advise them what to do. So who are these analytics guys? These are analytics guys that he's hired. And how have they done so far? A very mediocre, less than mediocre, kind of 4-year period, 3.5-year period for Ron Rivera. Just not working out. Another NFL issue is what's coming up on Sunday, in case you haven't peeked too far ahead. Maybe the best game of the day is going to be played at 9:30 in the morning. Now, that's fine with me. I mean, that's my wheelhouse, so that's fine. But the Dolphins and the Chiefs are playing in Germany on Sunday. And so, again, that's international, so it's kicking off at 9:30 in the morning. And Peter King was on yesterday on Dan Patrick, and the question was, well, why would you schedule 2 of the best teams in the AFC head-to-head in a game that kicks off at 9:30 in the morning?
Well, a lot of people in the last couple of weeks have been saying, why in the world would the NFL export one of the 10 best games out of 272 on its schedule for 2023 to Germany, where it's going to be played at 9:30 in the morning, and the rating will not be as good as the game, let's just say. And, it's a very, very good question. You have to start with the fact, A, Kansas City wanted to play over there. B, the NFL, they had 9 home games, and so the NFL likes to schedule teams so that they can keep their 8 home games and then play their 9th home game internationally when they can do that. So this is a year that Kansas City has 9 home games. They had a terrific schedule at home. And, they've got Philadelphia at home, Buffalo at home, Cincinnati at home, and they had Miami at home. So when they went to schedule all of these games back in March, April, early May, they just said, wow, we got so many choices with the Kansas City Chiefs, but we do not want to export Cincinnati. It could be an AFC championship preview. We don't want to export Buffalo. They're already going to go over and play in London this year. And they really didn't want to have a Super Bowl rematch at 9:30 in the morning in Germany with Philadelphia. It really came down to 2 games, either Detroit or Miami. And I think that there was some thought inside the league that, listen, Detroit has earned its way into a richer schedule this year. And they took a chance. The NFL took a chance in scheduling Detroit for the opening game. And it turned out to be an incredible chance, for them, because it was a game for 4 quarters. The Lions won. It got a huge number. And now they'll go overseas, and NFL Network is jumping for joy to have this game.
Yeah, and I don't think that they thought Miami would be this good this year, because there was a lot of questions about Tua going into the year. And, yeah, Miami's had a couple of bad losses, but they've been very impressive in their wins. They score a lot of points. And Kansas City is struggling right now. They're not the Chiefs of old. The way the league works, what you look like in October may not have much bearing on what you look like in December and in January when you go into the playoffs. But right now, the Chiefs are not hitting on all cylinders. So this could be a heck of a game. And have it 9:30 in the morning. Be great for me. I wish that's the way that's why I've said many times, West Coast time works great for me. West Coast time for sports, that would be perfect. World Series getting started at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Count me in, but that's not how the television clock works. You want to get the maximum number of viewers on the East Coast where most people live, and that's why these games start so darn late. I want to throw this in because I meant to mention this yesterday. There's a really good story in Bethesda Magazine written by Mike Unger where he does an interview with Josh Harris, who it sends a little tingle up my spine every time Josh Harris talks about growing up in Chevy Chase. I didn't really realize how close he grew up to me. He's younger than I am. But he, in the end of the story, he said, I guess this was before he was named owner of the Commanders and nobody knew what he looked like, but he says his mother still lives in Friendship Heights, and when he was visiting her, he stopped by his old house in Chevy Chase, and he said, I just knocked on the door. It's right near East-West Highway and Beach Drive. Well, that's right near Candy Cane City. I used to play pickup basketball there. I used to ride my bike down there when I was a little kid. My parents used to take me there to go on the merry-go-round, the whole deal. So I grew up right off of Jones Bridge Road, running Walnut Hill Road. So we were really close. Not that we would hang out together because he's younger than I am, but he said when he went and saw his old house, he knocked on the door and they answered and they had a long discussion. It was pretty funny. I don't think he could do that today because he is so recognizable now, having been on TV a lot, but I thought that was cool. The other thing that struck me from this story is he talked about, his academic background. He's obviously very, very bright. He is not, though, he's not the smoothest of speakers. To have achieved the kind of success that he's had in business, I've met some people who have done that, and they are very, very smooth when they talk publicly. When they are interviewed, he's a little halting. He's stumbles around a little bit. He doesn't come across as the smartest guy in the room, and he probably intentionally does that. But when you read this, you go, really? This is what you were thinking? His father, he grew up well. His father was an orthodontist. His mother was a teacher and a homemaker. And he said when he went to school, he didn't know anything about business. Well, I guess your father would have to know something about business if you're an orthodontist, or maybe you just had an accountant to handle all that. But anyway, he said he went to Penn, took an econ class that he liked, and he found out. This is odd. He says he found out when he went to Penn that there was this school called Wharton, which turned out to be the best undergraduate business school in the country. I mean, wouldn't you think if you you're interested in studying business that you would know that going to Penn, but okay, he's saying he did. Oh, really? You got Wharton there? What's Wharton? Oh, Wharton's a good business school? Okay, I'll do that. He says a lot of people are blessed with innate skills. I was blessed as an investor and a business builder. I remember my senior year, my dad saying, you should be an accountant. That's the really safe way to go. That's such a Jewish parent thing to say. Be an accountant. It's safe. Come on. And he said, no way. He said he went to Wall Street. He says there was the top of the food chain in terms of where the best and the brightest people wanted to go. I went to a place called Drexel Burnham Lambert, which at that point had created the high yield market. I went into this thing called the Financial Analyst Program, which is like a boot camp for finance where you work 100 hours a week, but you learn the most interesting deals and the smartest people. At the end of the 2 years, I said, I'm going to apply to one school. If I get in, I'll go. Otherwise, I'll keep working. Harvard Business School. They let him in. I was always shooting above. With young people, I say, shoot for the moon, shoot for the stars, dream big. Even if you miss, you're going to be better off. And I'd say he's doing pretty well right now. And I guess he had to sign off on the James Harden trade last night, right? Harden getting his way out of Philadelphia. Maybe, kind of a window as to what will happen here. But those two things really struck me like, oh, really? You got a school called Wharton? Wouldn't you know that when you go to Penn? Would seem you'd know that now. When he went, maybe not. I don't know. And then, I'm going to go to business school. Harvard. If I get in, I'm going. If not, I'm just going to keep making big money on Wall Street. But everything worked out well for him. And I think everything worked out well for us as fans of the football team because we have him. And most important of all, we don't have Dan Snyder anymore. Steve Buckhantz with memories of Hondo as well. He'll join us next. It's the Tony Kornheiser Show, ESPN 630. Steve Buckhantz, the longtime TV voice of the Wizards, and before that, the sports director at Channel 5 joins me. And Buck and I both grew up in the Washington area in the 60s and the 70s. And if you grew up here at that time, we only had two professional teams. We had the Senators and the Redskins. Both of them played at D.C. Stadium, later RFK Stadium, and neither one was very good. But each team had a spectacular athlete. The Redskins with Sonny Jurgensen, who threw the most beautiful spiral anybody has ever seen, and Frank Howard, who hit the longest home runs anybody had ever seen, and twice he led the American League in home runs, and we've been talking about it throughout the morning. Frank Howard passing away yesterday at the age of 87. What struck you most at the moment, Buck, when you heard yesterday that Howard had passed away?
Well, it was sad on a note that, like you said, we both were, saw him, albeit we were young. I remember my grandfather used to take me out of elementary school to see opening day at D.C. Stadium, and I got to go down there a few times and see him play. And I remember him being figuratively and literally larger than life.
Yeah.
He was just a big human being. So I was sad on that note. But then I got to meet him a few years ago when he came to our St. Jude golf tournament, and then it really made me sad because he was such a nice man. I mean, wow, it was almost surreal meeting him, but he was so down to earth. It was phenomenal. So he somehow we got him to come out to our golf tournament, and he didn't, and he sat there obviously and took pictures and signed autographs for people. And he didn't play golf, but he rode around on a golf cart and just cheered on the foursomes and inspired people. It was phenomenal to watch. And I thought to myself, wow, how many professional athletes of his stature do something like this? And that's what really struck me. So when I got to sit there and talk to him and just reminisce for a few minutes, it made me even more sad to think about it because he just seemed, Andy, to be, and it's the first time and the only time I had met him, that he just seemed to be such a nice human being and a nice, personable man and just so down to earth, so genuine. I loved it about him.
What made me sad when baseball came back here in 2005, it had been gone for all those years, and people like you and me remember Howard, remember watching him play, remember the home run tear that he went on in 68 where he had 10 home runs over a 6-game period and all that, and the All-Star game where he hit a home run in 69. So few of us were around to remember that. And I thought, wow, if baseball ever came back during those years, what a big presence Howard would have, and he showed up at a few things, and they put him in the Ring of Honor as they should. But I don't think he really got his proper due when the Nationals came back. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I would agree with you. It wasn't like he was ignored, but so often when something like this happens or when guys are older, I don't want to say they get forgotten, but they like you say, they don't get the due. I think of somebody like Joe Jacoby, who's clearly not even that old yet. But the longer you wait, the less impact it seems to have, at least on a new generation.
Right.
And I think that's probably why I hate to say that, because we should never forget, whether they be athletes or war heroes or people that fought for our country or that kind of thing, veterans. But you do tend to minimize some of it. And but you look at his record and his stats and what he did for the city. You can't minimize it. It's just he was one of the greats.
Yeah, and if you didn't see him play, I mean, Aaron Judge is an imposing figure, and Aaron Judge hits a bunch of home runs, and I think he has the clean home run record at 62. But when you would see Howard at the plate with his size, remember how he used to swing that bat around like a toothpick? I mean, it was just like, oh my God! And especially for that time, Judge is big, but there are a lot of big players in baseball now. Willie Mays was like 5'10". I mean, the way he stood out because of his size and the way he was so imposing at the plate was really something to watch.
Well, and that's what really struck me when I met him at our golf tournament was. He was still a tall guy, but Andy, he was in phenomenal shape. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was not that long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and he was built. I mean, his upper body looked like he had been working out. He looked incredibly fit, and that's really made an impression on me because so many former athletes. Not all of them, but so many of them, either gain weight or they get old or whatever. He didn't look old, and so he was. I know he was in his early 80s, and he didn't look old, and he looked incredibly fit. So he had kept himself in great shape, and I was amazed at how good he looked.
Not only that, and you spent a lot of years in the NBA. How good he was as a basketball player. He was on the 1957 consensus All-American basketball team, and I looked this up. Two of the guys who were on it, Wilt Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor, two of the best who ever played the game. There were a few other. Guy Rogers played a long time in the league with Philadelphia. Hot Rod Huntley, who became a broadcaster.
Sure.
And here's one, a guard from Columbia, Chet Forty, who was a legendary television director. Did Monday Night Football for a long time. And so Howard was in that group, and he was drafted by the Philadelphia Warriors and could have played in the NBA, but liked baseball better. It's remarkable.
What was his height listed as?
Howard?
Frank Howard, yeah.
6'7", yeah.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, he was tall. He's still, even when I saw him a few years ago, he hadn't shrunk like a lot of guys do, like we all start to do as you get older.
Yeah, well, if you're shrinking from our height, it's a bad thing.
That's a problem.
If you're shrinking from 6'7", you got a ways to go. It's like
you become Lilliputian, yeah.
like I ran into Ronaldo Nehemiah a few years ago. He said, I lost a step. I said, yeah, but most of us don't have a step to lose.
That's exactly right.
By the way, we're talking to Steve Buckhantz. Were you at the at 69 All-Star game? Did you make there?
No, I was. How old was I? 14, something like that.
Yeah. Well,
no, I wasn't there.
Well, this is the last All-Star game that was played in the day. So they had a rain out on Tuesday night. So much rain that the dugouts were flooded, so they couldn't play. So we came back at 1:00 on a Wednesday afternoon for this game, and it was a blowout. Willie McCovey hit a couple of home runs. I think Bench hit one, but Howard hit a home run in that game. And the noise was just unbelievable.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
It was off Steve Carlton, who was pitching for the Cardinals at the time. It was before he was traded to the Phillies, and it was unbelievable. And then the other big dramatic moment was the last game in 1971. I was not there, but that was such. What do you remember about that? Because I remember. Here was my feeling at the time. The Senators were leaving, but the Senators have been mostly a bad team, and there were already rumors that Joseph Danzansky, who owned Giant Food, was going to bring the Padres here. So as a young and stupid guy, I was thinking, okay, we're going to get National League Baseball in a year. It's okay.
Right.
And, we didn't have it for 33 years.
Yeah, it went away. I just think back to the film of that we had of everybody running out onto the field, and that's my greatest memory of that. And then, like you say, we didn't know that we wouldn't have baseball, and then I have a generation of nephews that didn't know baseball here. They knew nothing about it, and they didn't become Oriole fans, but they played some other sports. They played rugby or whatever.
Right.
They didn't even know we had a team or the fact that there was any history or anything like that. So it was pretty sad, but it was good to get baseball back, but it was certainly a long time.
Yeah, and there were a lot of false hopes. In fact, you had one of them, the story that you broke. What year was that when you had it that the Astros were coming here?
Yeah, that was interesting because I knew the group, and I've always given them credit. It was the group led by Bill Collins, which was the Virginia baseball group, and Bill Collins, who at one point owned a company called MetroCall, which was a paging company here, is really responsible for us having baseball in Washington. He went and lobbied the commissioner and Major League Baseball to get a team here in Washington for years and years and years before any of these other guys even really got started with that. And they had a deal with the guy that owned the Houston Astros.
John McClain.
Yeah, Drayton McClain. Yeah.
Right.
John McClain, I believe, was a diehard, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
This is Drayton McClain.
Yeah.
And now, because I knew these guys and knew them pretty intimately, they would let me in on the secret, the fact that they were negotiating with Drayton McClain to bring the Houston Astros up to Washington. And not only that, but they had already had 2 or 3 visits with McClain who had come here. They went out to RFK Stadium to look at the stadium, the whole bit, and they had a handshake deal. So all the other guys in town were like, no, it's going to be the San Francisco Giants or it's going to be the Montreal Expos or coming here or what have you, and they had no clue. And I knew, but I wasn't allowed to say anything until I got the word from their group that I could go ahead and make the announcement that it was going to be the Houston Astros, and we did that on the 10 o'clock news that night. So that was kind of fun. But, for whatever reason, the other owners, I'm told, didn't want Drayton McClain to come up here and be so successful. They wanted him to sit in Houston for a while and stew, and that's what they made him do. But that was the team that was going to come here, was the Houston Astros, but that didn't work. But you can credit Bill Collins for getting that done. He's the one really he's responsible for us having baseball in Washington.
Yeah, no question about that. And what that did with the flirtation with Washington was Houston built a stadium for the Astros, and that's
right. Exactly. They stayed there, and I can't believe, Andy, you haven't asked me about my alma mater yet. This is a little disappointing.
I know. I was going
a little disappointing.
I'm going to get you because you got up so early for me. You got up before noon to do this show. I'm going to let you fetch. So here we go. So Buckhantz went to JMU, as most people know. He does games for them, both football and basketball. He's very close to his alma mater. And here's let me set this up, and you can make corrections. Okay. They have moved up in a division. There are rules in place which say for the first couple of years that you are in the upper division, you are ineligible for a bowl. So at 7-0. And probably, maybe even going undefeated, they will not be allowed to play in a bowl and will not be a part, of course, of the championship mix of the playoffs. So, explain to everybody why this is such a travesty.
You shorted them one game; they're 8-0, and
okay.
that's okay. And listen, they were in the FCS, which is some people know is the lower conference. There's the FCS, the football championship, whatever they call it, and then there's the FBS, which is where Maryland is, and Virginia Tech, and obviously Alabama and Clemson and Georgia and all those big schools. They moved up from the FCS, and when they were in the FCS for years, they were there, and they won 2 national championships there. So they were a good team like North Dakota State and all those other schools. They moved up year before last to the FBS, and last year they went 8-3, which was pretty good. Mm-hmm. In fact, they were ranked 25th in the country after 5 games because they had beaten Appalachian State on the road, which, as you know, is a pretty good team. So this year they started out, and now they're 8-0, and last week they were ranked 25th. This week they moved up a couple of spots. They're 23rd, which is a little bit I'm not going to say misleading. Look, they're not on the level of Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee. They're not on that level in Ohio State, clearly. They're not on that level. But they are in the FBS, which is the main division, the main football conference, and they are undefeated, so you can't ignore that. And they've had some big wins. They beat Virginia, although Virginia not good at the time.
Well, Virginia beat North Carolina, so
they did.
Yeah,
they did, and they've had some big wins already. They beat Marshall on ESPN on a Thursday night, and they beat them badly. And Marshall's a good football team, so they've had some good wins. They hung on to beat Old Dominion the other night, and that was maybe the bet of the century. I told all my friends, JMU was favored by 20 points, and I was like, Old Dominion's good. Yeah. They're a good team. They're not going to win by 20 points, and they hung on to win by 3. So anyway, the reason they can't play, and you've heard all the announcers that do these games, that do the JMU games, and most of them are on either ESPNU or 2 or sometimes the NFL Network. They've all come out and said, look, this is ridiculous. The NCAA needs to clear this up. The reason they made this rule was they don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry coming up from the FCS to the FBS, making the better money, but not being able to compete, not having enough scholarships and not being able to compete. Well, clearly that doesn't apply to a school like James Madison, who not only competes, they win. They were 8-3 last year. They're 8-0 now. They got some good games coming up, and I don't know if they'll go undefeated. I guess they could. I don't think they will, but they could. Even if they don't, they're not eligible for a bowl for 2 years because of this rule, which doesn't apply to schools like them. And that's unfortunate for the kids, because not only can they not compete for a bowl game, but no sport at the school can compete for a conference championship. So the baseball team, the basketball team, which won 22 games last year and had a good recruiting year this year, remember the softball team that was so good that year? They went a couple of years ago when they went to the NCAAs and got all that national attention. So none of them can compete, and that's unfair for the kids, and that's really the unfortunate part. But, folks down there in Harrisonburg are pretty stoked up. Listen, last year, now Virginia Tech's better this year than they were last year, but last year Virginia Tech and Virginia wanted nothing to do with James Madison.
Right.
And they play Tech. Tech actually asked to have the game moved back a year for whatever reason, and Madison acquiesced, which is fine. They got a little more money out of it, but they'll play them in 2 years in Blacksburg. They beat them there in 2012. And that spawned one of the great jokes, Andy, that I don't know if you ever heard, that I ever told you of, ever.
Hope it's clean.
This is when between Madison and the Tech.
Okay.
This was when JMU was in the lower level, the FCS. And I used to tell this to all my friends who went to Tech, because I got a lot of friends that went to Virginia Tech. And I said, how many batteries does it take to light up Blacksburg, Virginia? And they said, what? And I said, 1 AA. And they used to laugh at me and say, well, that'll never happen again. And it may never happen again, but we'll find out in a couple of years when they play down there. But that was a huge, huge win for them, obviously. I think Tech was overlooking JMU. But at any rate, look, the stadium is beautiful. They had a sellout the other night. It's 26,000 people. They're going to add to it. But, I mean, it's beautiful. If you've driven down 81 and seen it, it's a gorgeous stadium. It's really nice, and the whole campus is good. So everybody's jacked up about the Dukes, and they have a nice team. They're still a mid-major. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they could even beat Maryland, but they're still a mid-major, and they give them a good game, I think. So it's fun, and I had to get some publicity out for them, because the Post gives them very, very little publicity. They still giving UVA all kinds of publicity, and they're not good. So
okay.
All
right.
That's that.
All right, Buck, I gave you the floor. You did a good job
with
that.
Andy.
And don't say I didn't do anything for you, right?
No, I appreciate that. You giving me the time. That was huge on your part.
Absolutely. Well, and I appreciate the time on Frank Howard, and great memories of him, and a wonderful man, as you
yes, he was.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
All right, Andy, take care.
That's Steve Buckhantz, and he, like me, grew up in the suburbs. He's on the other side of the river in Virginia, but I was in Maryland, and in those days, maybe had 20 Senators games on TV a year. Listened to him on the radio a lot, and going to a baseball game was different then than it is now. I mean, you can go on StubHub, and you can even go to the box office. You can still do that. But when the team was drawing on a good day 10,000 people, you just decide, at the last minute you wanted to go, and you go to the box. It was like the same cost as a movie ticket, and you go to the ball game. and going to see the Washington Senators with Frank Howard in those days was a lot of fun. So I thought we did a nice tribute to him with a number of voices today, including Steve Buckhantz.